I'm Elaine Petruccelli, and I'm from Book Passage, the fiercely independent bookstore that has been bringing authors and readers together for 45 years. We're so happy you're with us tonight, especially for this amazing book, a book that means a great deal to me. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who is with us tonight. And if you are not already on our email list, please join, because we'd love to let you know not too often what's coming up. We have some really great events every week, and this one is particularly special. If you are inclined to buy this book or any book, please go to bookpassage.com and you'll be able to order it there, or come in to our Ferry Building San Francisco store or to our Corte Madera store. We'll look forward to meeting you if we haven't met you already. So I am so passionate about this book that all of my colleagues that work don't call it Rig Justice, they call it Elaine's favorite book. And everybody knows what they mean. They say that. In 2019, back when we could still have dinner, a friend, Stephanie Ashworth, asked if possible if we could come to dinner with her and her husband and this couple. And she said, it's really important to me because my friend John had something happen that I think you and Bill should know about. That was pretty mysterious. And then I said, well, what's it about? And she said, well, have you heard about Varsity Blues? And I said, oh yeah, I've been reading everything about it. So she said, we want to tell you something. So we went to dinner and we met Molly and John. And as John told us his story and what had happened, both Bill and I were appalled that this could have happened. And we were also so impressed with both Molly and John. We knew that these people were genuine and what they were saying was understated, if anything. Bill, my husband, Bill, who is a lawyer, had practically had smoke coming out of his ears as he heard about it, but we won't get into that. Fast forward, I was having dinner still on pre-pandemic with a friend named Adine Corns, who is a former publisher. And I said, Adine, I have to tell you this story. It's just been bothering me. And so I told her about John. And she said, do you mean you waited until the end of dinner to tell me this story? It's too important. Just sit down. We're going to stay a while. I want to hear more. And the very next day, she contacted John. The result is this gorgeous book, Rigged Justice: How the College Admission Scandal Ruined an Innocent Man's Life. And I have to say, they tried to ruin an innocent man's life, but John is a very strong and ethical man, and he has come through it with not only flying colors, but with a book that reads like a thriller, and yet every word is true. I'm so happy that Mark Kelly, who has been following John's story ever since Adine told him about it, has agreed to interview John on camera tonight. Mark practiced law for 37 years. He started his career as a maritime lawyer. Then he got into education law, two things that are very much connected to this book. But his love for the water and sailing has always continued. He was a racer. He competed on open water as a rower, and he has a 29-foot slope that he loves to race in the bay and anywhere else. So we are very fortunate to have this wonderful man who is going to actually introduce John. My introduction is all about emotion, and lawyer Mark Kelly will give us the facts. Thank you. Mark.
That's great. Thank you, Elaine. It's quite an introduction. So John's book is in the news. You may have caught him on Good Morning America recently. You may have read the article in the New York Times, a review in the Chronicle or other places. But Varsity Blues is still in the news too. John's been through the meat grinder already some time ago. But right now there are a couple of trials going on of some parents. There are more trials to come. And the mastermind, Rick Singer, is still out there having pled guilty, and he's not going to be sentenced for a while yet. So I will tell you whatever you thought you knew about Varsity Blues from reading the news, and it's been in the news, you're going to know more after today. And you're going to know a lot more when you read the book, which I read in one sitting. You really can't put it down, like Elaine said. And a couple of things were really noteworthy to me. The first is, it's a very clear view of the underbelly of not only college admissions, but a federal prosecution. And John spares no one. And most importantly, he doesn't spare himself. This is no pity party. It's no get even book. This is just a real objective look at how things really work, both in both of those institutions. And I have to say, neither one turns out looking particularly good. But it's also, for most of us, I think will be the first real clear view you're going to get of Rick Singer's side door approach to getting rich kids largely into college. As you may know from the news or from the Netflix semi-documentary that also featured John, Rick Singer said there's three ways to get a kid into college. The first is the front door, which is by grades and scores. Very traditional, old-fashioned, and he could help with that by having people take the test for your kids and so on. And there's the classic back door, which was, grandpa's got his name on a building at your college. What he felt he had innovated is the side door. And the side door was getting kids in by way of the athletic departments, by way of supposed athletic qualifications. And that's where John comes in. So with that, John, let me turn it over to you, and maybe you can start us off with a few paragraphs from the start of the book.
Sure, I'd love to, and thank you, Mark, for that great introduction, and thank you, Elaine. This is really this is the perfect culmination of all this, is to have the opening night here be at Book Passage. I can think of no better place to be. So, thank you very much for this. So. I'm really excited. This is the first time I've actually read from the book, so I'm pretty excited to do that. So I will begin. February 2019. You probably don't think you need to hear this. I wouldn't have guessed I did, but there's the thing. When special agents from Internal Revenue Service and Federal Bureau of Investigation knock on your door at 7 a.m. and flash their badges and ask where they can if they can come in, your answer should be no. Tell me you're happy to reschedule when you have a lawyer by your side. Maybe that knock will come, as it did for me, after you have just finished changing your daughter's diaper and the remnants of your kids' breakfast, yogurt and smashed berries, all over your Red Sox t-shirt and pajama pants. Maybe you and your wife will be in the middle of snapping onesies and tying shoes and packing backpacks so you can get to daycare drop-off before you both rush off to work. You're going to be puzzled by the agent's appearance on your front step and probably a little nervous. I know I was. And your instinct will be to say, sure, of course, come in. You may even offer them coffee and help them with their chairs as they settle in at your kitchen table. Then you'll join them and fold your hands in front of you and look at them openly, ready to help. You'll think you are doing the right thing. After all, you have done nothing to hide. But you will be making a colossal mistake. Only innocent people let them in. My lawyer would tell me later. Criminals know not to do that.
Wow. Well, with that chilling scene in mind, let's go back earlier and talk about how you got to that point. And I have to apologize to folks. We're going to have to skim over a lot of what's in John's book, which is a really good read, as I say. mostly skimming over the personal side of it. So let me just summarize how you got into the position at Stanford you were in. You had been the coach there for 11 years. You started sailing as a kid. You were a very successful junior sailor up to what I would call the pre-Olympic level, got into coaching at the club level and then the small college level, got brought into the US Naval Academy, where you turned around a once legendary program that had really fallen on hard times in just a couple of years. And that led to the job at Stanford, which was a good program, but became, under your tutelage, the West Coast powerhouse. You were the coach there for 11 years. By the time 2019 rolled around, you won, I think, 29 out of 30 regional championships. Your teams have been invited to nationals almost every year, had placed very well at nationals. You had a number of All-Americans on a regular basis. You had one of your people named Sportsman of the Year. So this program was the real thing and very impressive. But where we get into this story is like any other coach in a what's quaintly called a non-revenue sport, i.e. not football, not basketball. Every year you've got to recruit kids for the team because it's a 4-year college, and you've got to look for money. So let's talk about those two things. And why don't you start out by talking about your idea of who you wanted on your teams and how recruiting worked, and then we'll talk about the money side.
Yeah, when it came to recruiting, the biggest thing for me, and I think it holds true for any coach, is finding the players that will match the school. And certainly that means academically. Certainly that means the drive to expand themselves, obviously not only academically, but athletically as well. And that is certainly prevalent at Stanford. There are incredible student athletes there that work incredibly hard. And my job is to bring in student athletes each year that fit that mold, and then will fit the chemistry of the team. And so that is something that I've worked on all the time. Stanford was and still is, a top level, top echelon athletic university. And it competes in 36 varsity sports, thankfully 36 again. We almost lost 11. But to have all those sports there, it's just an incredible institution. And to bring athletes in that max it is huge. So I got a lot of interest every year from the top level of the sailing community. Finding the top level recruits was not a problem. The Stanford name kind of brought them in. And sailors tend to be at the top of their academic institutions in high school. Finding really well qualified sailors that were also really qualified academically was not hard. There was a lot every year, and I know they'll continue to be. What I struggled with, and when I worked through my time at Stanford, is that it sounds opposite, but you can't really have a team full of rock stars all the time. Only a few of those rock stars are able to start. And the ones sitting on the bench it's going to be tough, and it's going to hurt that chemistry that I worked to recruit so hard. So I was looking for other ways to help improve the team and improve the chemistry of not only having the top level recruits, which we certainly did every year. I'm very proud of every recruiting class that we brought in my 11 years there. All of them were fantastic, but to also bring players to augment that incredible top level with players that are going to just work hard every day, that want to love the sport, that are bringing talent from other sports and be able to bring it in. A great shining example of this is we had an athlete at Stanford. We also had an example of this at the Naval Academy too, where this woman was an incredible gymnast, but because of injuries, as you know, it was really tough for a gymnast. Towards the end of her Stanford career, she just couldn't play gymnastics anymore. It was too much on her body. And she came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a senior, but I really want to sail. I have that competitive edge. I want to do this. I'm an incredible athlete as a gymnast," and she certainly was. "But I just can't play my sport for my last year, and I don't want to do nothing my last year." And so she walked onto the sailing team. It was incredible. And it certainly, and was able to compete at the national championship and the national level that year because of her athleticism. And so that was certainly part of our sport, is bringing those kind of walk-ons on, teaching them our sport, using their athleticism and their skills from other sports to add to our team.
So now let's talk about the funding side, because that's, you were a very small department and had, money pressures. And it sounds like from your book that those increased over time. So why don't you fill us in on that?
Yeah, there was definitely fundraising pressures there. It evolved in my 11 years there. When I first started, I was hired by then athletic director Bob Bowlesby. It was a different, fundraising was handled differently. There, his main focus was coach's coach, and we have a development office that will fundraise money. And certainly we were asked as coaches to go to events, to meet people, talk about our sport, talk about our student athletes, all the things that I could do nonstop. I love that. And when it came down to asking for fundraising, that was not going to be our job. And it wasn't. And then Bernard Muir was hired as Bob Bowlesby moved on to be a commissioner. And it changed right away from my first meeting, where it was clear that if I wanted to, and at the time I really wanted to add a third coach for the Stanford staff, because we were traveling back and forth to the East Coast every weekend, and we needed it for the team. And his response was, well, as soon as you endow one of the coaching positions, then we can talk about adding a third sport, meaning that you have to fundraise that. And we're talking over $1 million of fundraising just to do that, so I could add that third coach. And so that's just one example of it. The other part of it is that all of our equipment every year, the school did a great job of funding us for our travel and most of our uniform needs and so on. But for our essential equipment, which was boats and sails, we had to fundraise for all of that. So in order to keep that up and be able to have equipment for the players to use each and every day of practice, and for us to host events too, we had to fundraise for that.
Well, with that set up, let's talk about how Rick Singer came into your life.
Yeah, that was a moment I will never forget, that's for sure. So I just finished practice. Our boathouse, for those of you who don't know, the Stanford Boathouse, which is beautiful, is in Redwood City. And so I was just merging onto the 101 from the Woodside Seaport Boulevard exit onto the 101, going south, going home. I lived on the Stanford campus. And as I was driving and merging, I got a phone call. And the phone call had a Newport Beach phone number, which I thought was a recruit. We recruited heavily from Southern California, the Newport Beach area for sure. So I picked up, and he introduced himself as Rick Singer, as a recruiter, and as someone that could help me find recruits for my team. And I had heard of recruiters for sure for sports like football and basketball and so on, never for sailing before. But I was at Stanford. There was always, if there was going to be a first to break new ground, it should be at Stanford. And so I said, okay, that's great. He said, I'm here talking to other coaches. I would love to talk to you. So we made an appointment to meet, I believe it was 9 the next morning, something like that, in my office in the athletic department. So I went in the morning, did my normal routine, and then waited for Rick Singer in my office. And I was actually really waiting for a phone call from the front desk, or I think at the time it was a text message you would get from the front desk that you had a visitor and to let him in. But he was already in walking the halls in the morning. So he had full access to the athletic department. And he just showed up at my door of my office in the main athletic department building, and walked in and introduced himself and sat down. And my interaction with him, those personal interactions where he was sitting in my office and there was a few, he was very charismatic, very easy to talk to, was unique in who he was and kind of his phrases and how he'd spin things, but was very interested and really wanted to listen to what I had to say about my sport, what I had to say about the needs for my sport and who I was looking for. He was very honest, saying that, I know nothing about sailing. I know nothing what makes a good recruit for sailing, but help me find you, great recruits. That seemed pretty good to me, to have someone else out there looking for recruits. That seems ideal. So that was my first interaction with him, is him trying to find recruits and showing me that. He had, and as we talk about in the book, he had the very first recruit there who was Molly Zhao. And so in that first meeting, that was the first time he introduced me to Molly Zhao, really just by telling me about her, and saying, hey, I would like to send a resume and you tell me whether she's a good recruit or not. I don't know. So that seemed perfectly reasonable to me. So I said, sure, send it on. So that was really the first interaction with him.
There was an interesting comment in your book that your lawyer, not to jump ahead, but yes, you had to hire a lawyer. He called that kind of that first phase grooming, like you'd think of as, various pedophiles or whatever, is somebody trying to just get in your good graces and get you to trust them before they really start abusing you, right?
Yeah.
Is that how you see it now?
Certainly looking back at it, absolutely. He hit me up on all the insecurities that I had of having a small sport and a huge athletic department, of having the needs of a third coach and resources for my team. Certainly hit me up on, finding recruits. I mean, that's certainly every coach's weak spot. That's what we need to continue to improve on, and finding the right players for Stanford. And so he played into that really well, and he made me feel comfortable, and he listened, and he made me feel like he believed in me, and that's my vain moment. It made me feel like he believed in me, and certainly believed in my program, a smaller program.
So how did money first get brought into the relationship with Rick Singer?
So Molly Zhao was the first one where money was introduced, and the way it worked was that he was interested in having Molly Zhao as a recruit, and if somebody was interested in, I told them that, looking at her resume, it was okay, it was decent, but I had already recruited someone that would kind of fill her spot. So there was really no reason for me to recruit Molly Zhao in that. So I responded to him and said, hey, look, she could definitely sail in college. She could definitely, if she applied to Stanford and got in, she's more than welcome to be on the team. This is someone that should be sailing in college for sure with this resume. But I don't have a recruiting spot. There's nothing I can do to help her. And his response to me was, well, her parents are very, very well to do. And if Molly gets into Stanford, they would be willing to donate $1 million to your program. Is that something that would work? And I was blown away. It's not every day that somebody says, "Hey, here's $1 million." But I told him I knew nothing about that. I don't know whether that has any impact or not. To be true, and kind of backing up with admissions itself, the admissions department determines who gets into Stanford or not coaches. We support players, we show resumes, we show scores, we talk about how the player can impact our team, but we do not make the final decision of who gets into Stanford or not. The admissions department does. So I went to the athletic director who was in charge of my sport at the time. She also happened to be the head of development for the athletic department, and said, hey, I've been approached by this family, and if they get into Stanford, they would think about donating $1 million. Is that something that Stanford does? Is that something that would work? And she responded to me saying that, I don't know, I'll have to ask. So it kept going up the chain. And so I'm assuming she asked, because she came back to me in a phone call a few days later and said, actually, it is something that Stanford could do, but $1 million isn't enough to have an impact on the admissions process. And so from there, I kind of dropped it. I was like, okay, I got my answer. I asked, I didn't know how this was going to work. And I responded to Rick saying, that's it. There's nothing else. He wanted to pretty aggressively come up to Stanford from Southern California and talk to the athletic director and so on. I didn't think that was very appropriate to do that. I had asked and answered. it was done from that. I was then got an email from that same athletic director saying that, we'll look for other spots for Molly, but it doesn't look like there is any, at the time. And you can imagine that all coaches are asking for more spots for their teams. But we can put Molly Zhao on a development watch list in parentheses. And so that was the response to me. And after I got that email, I said, okay, now I'm really done. There's nothing else for me to do. And I honestly didn't think about Molly Zhao for months after that, until Rick called me again and told me that she had gotten into Stanford, which I had no idea that she did.
Now, there were two other students who was, as I recall, we refer to by pseudonyms that you don't even have to use those, but there were only two others that he put you in touch with. And frankly, it looks like all three sort of got lumped together later on in the prosecution. But as you say, Molly Zhao got in on her own. You didn't support her. You had nothing to do with that. So talk about the other two.
Yeah, to be clear, the prosecution looped Molly Zhao into everything, but they actually never charged me. In fact, Stanford and the government have both said that I did nothing to get her in. So even though they talked about her, because I think they're very interested in her father, when I was doing my information and plea deal, the prosecution was very interested in Molly Zhao's family, but I knew nothing to help out. But the other two students are the ones that I actually was charged with. These two students were proposed from Rick. The first student that came up, he had, I would say, a mediocre resume, but was someone that really wanted to go to Stanford and apparently really wanted to sail at Stanford. I really wanted to be there. And it made me think, so I put him on the list, and what we have is kind of a general ranking and justification list is what they call it. So it's a larger list. It's not your final recruiting class, but it's to give admissions an idea of what you're thinking of, who you're thinking of, what spots you're going to fill, why. Why are you filling these spots? Generally, how are these players going to help you, and so on. And it was not the final list to go on with admissions from us. And so I put this first student on there, brought his grades and test scores to admissions, which they looked over and thought he was academically qualified. And so I started down the process of supporting him, but that doesn't mean I was going to actually support him in the end. I just, hey, he was academically qualified, but he kind of moved forward from there. As the relationship went on with Rick, it turns out the player was interested in another school. And so didn't even apply to Stanford through me at all, and ended up going to that other school. And I hope is very happy there. So that student kind of dematerialized from there. The money connection to that student, or so the government claims, was a $110,000 donation. And this is my lawyer would describe as kind of the continuing of the grooming process, where Rick again had a meeting with me in my office, showed up, walked through the office, no problem, no worries, knew everybody, knew everything. Came in, sat down, and said, we talked for a while. I think the conversation was well over 2 hours. And we talked about sailing, about recruiting, everything else. And at the end, he said, look, I really want to help you and the team out. I want to give you a donation, no strings attached. And the donation turned out to be $110,000. And so when I got that check for the $110,000, I brought it to development and told them, Rick gave me this, no strings attached. They said, great, no problem. The second student was, or Rick touted her, and I guess I'll never know whether she actually is or not, was a gymnast. And so that hit on me right away that, I could recruit a gymnast into the team and be able to do that had some sailing experience, not a lot, but was this athlete from a very athletic sport. And I got thinking, oh, this could be a person that could come in, crew on our team, be really athletic every day and really help, like I've seen other gymnasts in the past do. But she ended up not even applying to Stanford as well. Same thing, I put her in the ranking justification form, but never moved forward and never filled out an application that I know of, certainly not through me, and ended up going to a different school as well. In that instance, Rick, in terms of the money, was saying, "Hey, look, he told me flat out, like, none of these students have actually even applied to Stanford. Never want to go to Stanford, but I want to continue our relationship. So I would love to donate, what would amount to totally 500,000, but let's do 160,000 right now. That's what I can do to donate." And had those magical words that the government liked, a deposit on our relationship from there. The government took it one way, I took it another way from having all the other conversations with Rick, that it was truly a deposit on our relationship, not on a relationship with another student. And Rick was very clear that he wanted to continue to bring me students, but he wasn't saying that I had to bring them in. So through this whole relationship, I have a guy who's trying to find me student athletes to support my team, and trying to work towards figuring out what sailing and what a good sailing recruit looks like. And at the same time, seemingly from my perspective, is donating out of his own foundation to support my team. I think at this point that I'm really doing my job well, that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm fundraising without even trying, and I'm getting someone who wants to support and give me recruits that I could look at. That seemed pretty good. And in the end, it was too good to be true for that, for sure.
It's interesting because I know when from personal experience, cell phone reception in Palo Alto is mysteriously awful. And I read in the book about one of the key conversations where where Rick was talking to you about the last kind of arrangement and so on, which, unbeknownst to you, of course, was not only being tape recorded, but it had been scripted by the FBI. And so you're kind of on the phone going, yeah, you can't really hear what he's saying. But of course, and this is from the prosecution, in the telephone call, Singer and Vandemoer agreed that the deal that he had arrived at was $500,000 per student, that a $160,000 payment that Singer was planning to make would be a deposit for the next student, and the Singer still owed Vandemoer $340,000 for that student. So that's what they were reading to court. That's what they would put in front of the jury. That's not what you agreed to on the call that you didn't really hear anyway, right?
No, and it's tragic, but it certainly leads to one of my biggest mistakes of not listening. Certainly not putting perspective on it, but certainly not listening to this. So the way it worked is all the coaches' offices were on the second floor of the main athletic department, and none of our cell phones got great reception. They're all Stanford cell phones, and for all the technology that Stanford has, our cell phones didn't work in our own offices. And so everybody was answering a phone call. Every coach was answering a phone call from a recruit, and you had two paths to take. You could cut through the front of the athletic department and go into the Hall of Fame, which was beautiful and new, and it's great to go in there, but it's open to the public. So anybody could walk in and be loud or talk and so on. The other path is one I usually took, is I went down the stairs and out to the back alleyway behind the athletic department outside, and you got better cell phone reception there. So when Rick made those famous calls now that the FBI was listening to, he started talking through the whole conversation why I'm going out my door, take a left, go to the end of the hallway, passing 5 coaches' offices, take a right through a push door, go down 2 flights of stairs, out through 1 push door, into the bottom hallway where the equipment off room is, and then out through double doors, and then finally out to the tennis court. And so I'm going through that, and there is no way I'm paying attention to the phone call during that kind of gauntlet to get outside. And to be honest, even if I was paying attention to that, I wasn't really paying attention to the phone call anyways, because Rick was a talker, and he would go on and was really concerned about, him and me and so on for that. And those were two of my least favorite topics. My focus was on coaching my team, and we had practice in the afternoon. I had that particular afternoon, I had the two assistant coaches at the time up in my office, and we had work to do. And so I was hurrying him through the phone call. And as my lawyer would classify it, because he heard the tape recordings, I still to this day have not heard any tape recordings, but he heard it. Then he said, "You're yaying them to death. You're just saying, yeah, yeah, yeah." It's like, it's clear you're not really paying attention. You're distracted. And I promised him 100% that I was definitely distracted and not paying attention. I heard that he wanted to donate, and that was kind of the point of the call. I already knew, he told me before, that I wasn't getting a recruit. So the whole point of the call was for him to donate. And he said he was going to donate and gave me the number amount, and great, I was done. But if I had only listened, I could have said, "No, that's not our relationship, and no, that's not how things happen." But I didn't.
That then brings us to where we began, which is FBI and the IRS on your doorstep. Tell us about that interview, what you thought it was about to begin with, and how it kind of turned out to be more.
Yeah, around that time, February 2019, there was a huge basketball case going on where the FBI had been working on this case, which I think involved, shoe companies and agents and so on for that. And so for some reason, when I opened that and they wanted to talk to me, I kind of flashed to that a little bit, that maybe they wanted to talk about, Stanford's basketball. I had no idea. In essence, I had no idea. In essence, I was scared. I had never had an interaction with an FBI agent or an IRS agent before. I never imagined it being a good interaction. So I did the most unbelievable thing, is I let them come in. I led them to our dining room table, which was just inside the door. And it was kind of an open room where our kitchen was. And I offered them coffee and water and everything else, as a host should be. Completely, as I say in the book, covered in whatever breakfast was that morning, yogurt and berries and honey and everything else, and in my pajamas as well. And my wife was upstairs dealing with the kids and trying to get them ready, wrestling them into clothes and get them going. And I sat down and they started asking me questions. And honestly, it took a while for them to get to Rick Singer. It was just kind of general questions about recruiting and so on. And it made me feel comfortable almost. I was sitting there, I was still nervous, but I'm sitting there talking about my sport and recruiting and so on, those things I could do all day. And then I looked over the paper. The FBI agent was kind of leading the conversation, and she had a script laid out. And she'd kind of finally put that on the table. And I looked over and saw Rick Singer's name, and I was like, "Oh, wow, what's going on here?" They started asking me questions more and more about Rick Singer. And I was kind of assuming that Rick Singer had done something wrong, and they were trying to get some background or something that I could help with. And so I was like, "Oh, I would like to help. How can I help?" From that. It got eventually to the IRS agent kind of taking over the conversation and being very forceful and really wanting me to say that, I was a bad person and I had this whole deal and scheme with Rick, which I didn't. So that conversation left me reeling. At the end of it, I kind of left with, am I in trouble? What's the next step? What do I do? Where do I go from here? And the IRS agent looked at me and said that, you should get a lawyer. I said, "Well, I don't have one. I don't think I even have money for a lawyer. What do I do? What does that mean?" And so she had agreed to work with the federal prosecutor in Boston to find me a public defendant, and said that she would follow up with paperwork, which she did, from all of that. they left, and I was left, completely gutted and confused from all of it.
So you did get in contact with a lawyer, and he told you pretty quickly that you were in serious trouble. So what did he tell you about what the potential charges were, what the potential sentence would be, and what decisions you had to make?
Yeah. At first I had thought that I was a witness for Singer, as I said, and so I kind of primed him with that, because he called me asking me, what's this all about? So I said, I think they want me to witness against this guy, Rick Singer. And I said, okay, no problem. And then about 2 hours later, he calls me and says, you need to sit down. Rick Singer is witnessing for them against you. And you are the target of their investigation for bribery, for mail fraud, etc. And it was, it took my breath away. It was like someone was just stepping on my chest. And he gave me some time. We talked again, and he talked to the prosecutors again as well. And I talk about this in my book. There was this odd time frame that made all this worse as well. But he comes back and says, look, here's the charges with mail fraud and racketeering and so on. And each of these charges are going to could possibly carry up to a 20-year sentence. So you're looking at serious jail time from all of this. And his take was that it could be bluffing, just to kind of get you to take a plea deal and move forward, or they could be really pushing you forward. And my take was, I'm in trouble. Could be bluffing doesn't seem like a good line of defense from that. And so I knew quickly that I needed to get, not have a public defender, but to get an attorney that specializes in this part of the law. And as I would learn, when I talk about my book, is that I contacted a few attorneys down the line, and they all told me, well, this is a very specific part of the law that we don't work with. You need to find an attorney that specializes in this. And I found one that helped me tremendously.
So your new lawyer who knew the landscape, he clearly looked into it. He talked to the prosecution, but even he gave you some pretty tough news to handle, and a recommendation that was tough to swallow with some real risk attached.
Yeah, so some real risk for it. It all kind of culminated that I had to make a decision ultimately in about 5 minutes. And that's certainly not my lawyer's fault. It was just the way everything kind of happened in the timeline. Finally, when all the due diligence was done and he could represent me, I took a red eye out on a Thursday after practice, went to Boston, took a red eye to Boston. My father, who lives in the Boston area, picked me up at Logan, and it was freezing cold, really, really cold. And went into the law firm, and I, of course, slept like a baby on the plane. I had slept for about a week so far. My mind was just all over the place. And so at this point, my body is just shutting down. I'm physically done. And I sat down with the two lawyers for about 6+ hours going through everything. Brought my laptop, brought every piece of paper I had in my office, everything that I could show them, and walk through it. In the end, after that long process that needed to happen, they walked over to the federal building to talk to the prosecutors. They had set up a meeting. And really, they said, look, this is, already they're setting up for the press conference for this. Something's going to happen really quickly. And they're giving us essentially 5 minutes. We got to make the choice. And here's what we've done. They've made it down to 18 months in prison for pleading guilty to a conspiracy racketeering charge, which is the least of the charges for that. And we had talked before they left that why I would take that plea. Really, for me, what it came down to is, what did winning look like? What did fighting this look like in the end? And because it was a racketeering case, all the coaches, and the prosecution was very cagey about this. We knew there were others. We had no idea how many or how big or what the scope was. We learned 90% of what the public learned on March 12th. And I knew about 10% of what was there. So we learned just as much as everybody else on that day. And with that very little information, winning for me was sitting for months in a trial in a federal court, which they nicknamed the House of Pain, because no one gets out of there unscathed. And you have to be in front of the court with all these other coaches that, presumably I would be the least culpable of all of that. And they were going to go on and on. All the others lawyers are going to go on and on about all the other processes, all the other admission processes and everything else. And the jury's going to have to sit there for months and decide that you are somehow different. Or they're going to be really tired of the whole thing and just say, get rid of all these guys and loop everybody together. Certainly the press was happy to do that. But was the jury going to be able to see that I'm different after a month of trial? To be able to do that, and having my lawyer really having very little speaking time, because all the other defendants they're charged with more. They're going to be, defending more from that. Plus, we knew that the prosecution was going to put on more charges if I didn't take a deal, which would mean that there's more risk involved from all that. On top of that, he said that they're going to have to read every scrap of paper that comes across in the case. And they're right. If there's something in there that could help my case, they have to read it, which means a lot of time, which means a lot of lawyer fees. And even, obviously, we couldn't predict COVID at the time, but at that moment, we were talking about millions of dollars in lawyer fees to defend me properly. And I wasn't interested in a half defense in this. It was, it would have to be everything. And I'm going to sit there for a year waiting for my trial to happen. No one's going to hire me. I'm going to still lose my job at Stanford. No one's going to hire me to coach interim, especially when my future is up in the air. So what am I going to do to support my family? What am I going to do to move forward? It was impossible. And that's winning. I mean, you don't get the money back. The lawyers don't hand you the money back when you win. You pay them for their services. That's it. You don't get your career back instantly. A good example that was brought up to me a lot was the Duke lacrosse coach that was then, found innocent of everything that happened there, but the allegations and the court cases did the damage to his career. And he's now coming back, coaching D3 lacrosse and kind of moving forward. But it was a huge hit. And how do I support my young children, my wife that has an amazing job out here in the Bay Area, what we do. And again, that's winning. That's not losing. That's actually winning the trial. And so for me, in the end, it was, what am I giving up? Well, I'm going to give up my name or my reputation out the window. And that's certainly a hard thing to give up. That's something that you don't wake up one day and say, yeah, let's just throw all that away. It's something that is, and it certainly is over the years now, have taken a lot to get used to, but it was the only way I can move my family forward. And that's what I cared about the most. I did not want to risk a day of not being with my young children. I mean, say I went to prison for a couple of years. They're 3 and 2 at the time, 3 and 1 at the time. I'm going to miss those important years to try to clear my name. I don't know. For me, it was, in the end, it was not an easy decision, but to me, it was the right decision to move forward. And the last thing that my lawyer said to me that really stuck with me is, he said, look, John, you're going to be sitting there next to me in federal court, and I'm going to do everything I can to fight for you. And he has been amazing to do that. and you're going to look at me and be like, why didn't I take the plea deal? I can't be with my family. I'm getting, everybody can say whatever they want about me, and I'm never going to take the stand. The defendant taking the stand to defend yourself, that's for the movies. That doesn't happen in real life. So you're not going to get to tell your story or your side, and you don't have tape recordings of all the other stuff that Rick Singer said, and so there's nothing there to really hang your hat on. So that's why we decided in the end to move forward. So it was a tough, quick phone call with my wife saying, hope you're having a good day. I'm going to plead guilty to a felony and be a felon for the rest of my life. How do you feel about that? But my wife has been amazing and incredibly supportive. And that's just meant the world to me.
You do such a good job in your book of summarizing and putting quotes in of really the two key court hearings. One of them taking the plea deal in March of 2019, and then the sentencing in June of 2019, which you don't have to be a lawyer to be really interested in following, and the push-pull between the prosecution, the defense, the judge, but who sounds like you drew the right judge, a fair judge who expressed the appropriate level of skepticism towards the prosecution, particularly comparing you to other coaches who, as we're now seeing, took a lot of money and pocketed and did very well for a while. But so there, you go to Boston, you make the plea deal, you're in the press, Stanford fires you.
Yeah, that was tough. So I go on March 12th back to Boston. So the hardest part for me was after I took the plea deal, there was about 2 weeks of taking the plea deal in Boston that I had to go back and act like nothing happened. I have to coach every day, do the best I can for the student athletes, and work a lot in the background to help for a transition that I know is coming. I was told by the prosecutors that I couldn't say anything to anybody, otherwise they would charge me with obstruction of justice. I think they were worried that I would know somebody that they were going to charge and they were going to, be a flight risk. And so I just had to put my head down and compartmentalize every day and put a big smile on my face with all my players and continue to go through the season the way we had planned, knowing full well that it wasn't going to happen. I went to a regatta in Maryland at St. Mary's College, the place where I'd first started coaching in college. So that's actually the last place I coached in college as well, to come full circle. And there's a lot that happened there that I talk about in my book, but the one particular scene, we won the regatta, which was great. Go to the East Coast and win, that's always a good thing. And the way it's set up is my players were going off with my assistant coach at the time, Clinton Hayes, who's been amazing. And they were going off to the airport there. I was actually going to meet the women's team that had just competed at Navy and fly with them back home. And as we're leaving, one of my fellow coaches, a good friend of mine, looks over, and we were about to spend spring break with them for the week, and said, "Oh, I'll see you, next week in Florida, for our spring break training." And it just caught me there. I think I stopped for a second and I was like, "Oh, yes, of course, I'll see you there," knowing full well that I'm lying to him there. I wasn't going to see him, but there was nothing I could say.
The whole having to put on the happy face and was more than just after the plea deal. I mean, what comes through in the book is how much you love your players, your team, and the whole institution and everything else, and just having to live this sort of double life and still be a coach is just brutal. So I want to get to the sentencing, but in the meantime, we're going to be running right up against the hour, maybe a little past, but if there are questions, go ahead and send them in on chat function and we'll try to get to them. So you've got this 3-month period roughly between pleading guilty and being brought back for sentencing, which sounds like about the worst 3 months of your life. I mean, you're giving up your career, your home, everything is provided with your job at Stanford, and that's all gone, right?
Yeah. It's it was like watching my death in front of me, as morbid as it sounds. My career is dying in front of me every day, from press releases to people sending me awful messages to trustees of Stanford sending me hate mail. It just having to shut down my social media because it was just brutal. A couple of the calls, the marshals and stuff got involved. I mean, it was just crazy. It was a lot during that time, to deal with, and to not know my future of what it's going to be. And to have to go out and ask people, my friends, and hopefully they were still my friends at this point, to be able to write letters to support me, and know that this isn't me. And that was a really, really difficult process. I also started another process during that time of reaching out to some of the Stanford alumni and meeting them and giving them my story, for it, because I felt like I owed it to them, to do it. But really emotionally, I am just destroying myself for 3 months. Shame became a warm blanket. It just was, lots of self-pity, lots of screaming and yelling in the shower or in a car. I'm sure anybody that saw me drive by at that time was like, what is going on in there? It was not pretty. It was a lot to go through. But my focus was on sentencing and getting through that the best I possibly could, and being able to stay home with my kids was my biggest focus. And I got some great advice and some great help of how to handle it, of how to breathe and how to work myself through it. And it became invaluable when I was sitting in federal court, on June 12th.
So let's talk about June 12th. There you are in the courtroom, and who is there but Rick Singer?
Well, so Rick Singer was there on March 12th, actually. So,
okay.
And that was unbelievable, to go in, and the way it all worked out was that he was pleading guilty, at the same day, the same judge. We happened to get the same judge, and he was going right before me. And so the media circus was there, and full bore it. And to go in, and he pled before me, and my lawyer was in there listening to his plea, which my lawyer was completely amazed by. He was like, this guy is, something special. And I go in and I sit in the back, it's like being in a church pew, and I'm sitting in the back, and have all, the second I walk in that courtroom and sit down, and my dad's sitting beside me, and my lawyers are putting their back to the other seats, because every reporter in the room is just now glommed on and is trying to listen into every single conversation, every single word we're saying. And then to look up when the reporter's clear and I start moving forward, and there's Rick kind of sitting casually on the desk, just, excited, laughing it up. He had just pled guilty to multiple felony counts, and it was just like he was there relaxing on a Sunday afternoon, and laughing with his lawyers, laughing with the prosecution. It was just, I wanted to be sick. And then I walk up, and I have to pass him. We're inches away, face to face, from each other, for my turn to sit down and do this. And I'm shaking, and I look over at him, and he makes eye contact for a second, and then instantly his head down, turns, and walks away. And that is, the pictures of him coming out of federal court that have been all over the news, of him putting his head down and walking away. That's kind of what he looked like that moment. But every moment before that, it was like he was at Club Med, which was just, it was just disgusting. For them.
What's interesting in your book, and we won't get to this in any detail, but you give a pretty detailed picture of just who he is, from what you heard from others. And I think for the first time in the book, you'll see, or the reader sees, some of his internal notes he was taking. He had to produce those, I guess, off his phone as part of this, and they had to be produced in the criminal litigation. And he, it seems to be, as a layperson, he had this bizarre self-image along with little twinges of almost guilt about what he was doing to people like you. Just, it's
Yeah.
really, it's an interesting study and a very interesting personality. But getting to the actual sentencing, and again, this is with the same judge who seemed to show appropriate skepticism at the plea deal of just, why is this guy getting this? But going into the sentencing, you still thought you were looking at custody at some prison time, right?
Yeah, I really did. It it was certainly on the table. It absolutely was. So I was half expecting that I would be sentenced to some time in jail. No one really knew how much, and there was a lot of conversations going into sentencing of what jail would I would go to, how could I see my kids, and so on. I mean, that conversation alone is just, that's not a conversation that you ever think you're going to have in your life, and you never want to have in your life. But going into it, it was a real possibility. And in the first, I'll say this for the sentencing, is the first thing that we do when we go up to sit down, the judge walks in, we all stand up, and she instantly calls us up to her bench. And we're all looking at each other like, what are you talking about? Like, what are we doing? What's going on? And so we all go up, the prosecutor and my lawyers and myself, and she hands us, the judge hands us this email that she had printed out that was basically threatening her. Someone had gotten her personal email and threatened the judge that she'd better sentence me to, a long, lengthy sentence of jail. Otherwise, she was a horrible person and they would go after her. And the Marshal Service was informed that protects judges, and it was this whole thing. And that's how I started my sentencing. So I was just, she hands me this letter. I put it in my suit coat pocket, and I don't know if I was breathing. I'm not sure I was. But it was just an unbelievable way to kind of start this whole horrible process. Not to mention that a week before this, the prosecution actually, for the first time maybe ever, broke the plea deal with me. The defendants apparently break plea deals all the time. I held up my end of the bargain, but the prosecution wanted to break theirs. Luckily, the judge had nothing to do with that. So,
She sounds like she was focused on who is the victim here. How much did this person take from somebody? Well, he didn't take anything from Stanford. Stanford got the money, and as she put it, they talked about giving away the money, but it looks like they kept the votes, right? So she was skeptical of your culpability, if I could put it that way, and gave you, I guess, a light sentence. I mean, compared to what you were facing, but it was still a tough sentence.
it was still a tough sentence. Home confinement for 6 months. The $10,000 fine was hard too, and probation was tough. I will say that it was far better for me than to go into jail, because I got to be with my kids, and that's what I wanted out of it. So in that way, that was a success. But wearing an ankle monitor for 6 months, having people look at me as I walk down the street with an ankle monitor on, when I do get to go outside, having to have an officer approve me to go play with my kids on a Saturday afternoon and watch them ride their bike. That was all really hard to take, for sure. But it helped me move forward.
So where are you in life right now, John? How are things? What are you doing?
So right now, as you can see, I'm in a library. I work for an engineering firm in Half Moon Bay. Live in Half Moon Bay and love it out here. I work for a firm that there's 5 to 6 of us that all work with each other and have a great community. And that's, after everything that happened at Stanford at a large corporation, that's what I was looking for, is a small community that believes in each other, won't email each other when something goes wrong, but will actually look each other in the eye and have a conversation. And that's what I value the most. And I get to spend a lot of time with my kids, and I still get to coach on the weekends. So it's a good life moving forward, and I'm happy with it.
And one thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is a good thing to wrap up on, but you know, you've been through a lot in this whole process, and you lost a lot. No matter how good you've made things now, you've lost a lot. What was it that made you want to write this book?
Really, first and foremost, right now I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. I wanted to write this book for them. I wanted them, all too soon, they're going to be able to Google me, and it's not going to be pretty. And I want to have something out there that's in my words. And so that was really important to me. It was also really important to me to have that out there for my friends and family that deserve to hear my story from me. I didn't want to go down the road of Stanford of emailing someone that you're fired and never talking to them again. I wanted to be able to look someone in the eye and be like, this is me. Good, bad, and ugly. This is me. This is who I am. And this is what I stand for. And finally, I wanted to have it be a cautionary tale. I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And there's a lot of things, and maybe it's not about sailing, maybe it's not about recruiting, but large corporations and a lot of things, the power of the prosecution and what can go wrong. I want people to see the story and kind of heed the warnings and not make the mistakes that I did, and be able to protect themselves.
Wow. Well, that seems like as good a place to finish as any, John. It's a great book. It's a great read. I'm glad I didn't have to live through it, but you've done a really good job of giving the lessons you talked about. And I think your kids are going to be proud of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Elaine, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for this wonderful interview, and to my several years of friendship, John. I'm so proud of you. John will sign books that Book Passage will find a way to bring them up from Half Moon Bay or bring the books to him. So when you order your book on bookpassage.com, or you call or come into our Corte Madera or Ferry Building store, if you would like a signed book, or there's something short that you would like John to say, put it in the comments field and I'll do everything I can to make that happen for you. Tonight's event was recorded, and you'll be able to tell your friends about it or see it again on YouTube Book Passage TV. And so I hope you will. We have lots on there. And those of you who have been following us since the beginning of the pandemic and have been supporting us both with money and with sales and with advice, we are so grateful to you. This is a book to think about for the holidays. You can give it to lawyers. I will tell you, it will make them mad. My son and husband are lawyers, and every time we talk about it, I worry about their blood pressure. You can give it to a sailor, anyone who loves the water, loves sports, loves fairness. You can give it to educators. You should give it to trustees of universities. You can give it to anyone who loves a thriller, because as I was turning page after page, I was thinking, if I didn't know this was true, I would be sure it was a mystery. John has told his story, and it is something to really, really enjoy and read. And I say enjoy it because it will make you mad, I promise you, but you will get to know this incredible man. And so thank you all for being here, and we'll look for you on Book Passage TV, on YouTube, and in our stores and online. And John, you have a fabulous story here, and we want to follow where you go because big things are going to happen. Thank you. Good night, everyone.